internet. We're just waiting for our speaker to arrive. Hello, microphone. Next time I'll know about this story and tell you. Okay, are we all right to begin? Okay, good evening and welcome to our annual general meeting. Guest speaker, Professor Mick Wallis. I'll be introducing Mick and then he will take over from there. Mick Wallis is Professor Emeritus of Performance and Culture at the University of Leeds. He began his academic career in 1990 and retired from the University of Leeds in 2015, after 5 years as his faculty's Pro-Dean for Research and Innovation. His often interdisciplinary research has embraced cultural histories of performance, performance theory, arts work with people, sexual politics and sexuality, and performance design and technology. He's currently completing a monograph on drama in rural adult education in interwar England. And he has written an article on the promotion of amateur village drama in England 1900 to 1950 in the August number of New Theatre Quarterly. Mick became a National Teaching Fellow in 2001. And following Mick's lecture, I think there may be some time for a few questions before you have to join us for a drink. Okay, so thank you and welcome, Mick.
Thank you. Well, like many others, as you've seen before, I'm very grateful for the financial support the Society has afforded my research, some of it presented here. Reflections on historical pageantry I'd like to share with you do not constitute a thesis, but explore two ways of looking. In the first part, a pageant of histories, I look briefly at ways in which various pageants relate to history. To do that, I consider some of their rhetorical strategies. In the second, later part, a longer part, I consider two of what I'm calling the others of historical pageants. You'll see what I mean later. So first, a pageant of histories. At one level, this is a history of me. The action, the theme, is how I fell into researching historical pageants. The action is me following my nose. The first of the two episodes is set in the 1980s. What's the difference? When I was a mature student at Manchester University. My plan was to become an actor. My partner Simon and I became very interested in the novelist, playwright and poet Montague Slater. Slater, as you'll know, wrote the libretto for Benjamin Britten's Peter Pears. Peter Grimes. I know, no, okay, Peter Grimes. A new friend had been mentored by Monty as a young man and told us all about him, including his writing of some pageants. So for my year 3 dissertation, I decided to write about them and the circumstances in which they got married. Here's one of them. Towards Tomorrow was part of a whole day's celebrations at Wembley Stadium on the 2nd of July, 1938, the 16th International Cooperative Day. It was being celebrated in 38 countries, and all 38 proclaimed once again their unshakable faith in the principles of democracy, freedom, and peace. One of the 3,000 performers at Wembley recalled much later, "There was more people there than I'd ever seen in my life. We all walked around the stadium singing. I loved it. We were all in white and dressed up as peace." Towards Tomorrow was mounted by the London, Watford and South Suburban Cooperative Societies. It tells the history of cooperation. But that's only half the story. The composer, Alan Bush, wrote the music. theatre director Andre van Giesegem was pageant master, and Montague Slater wrote the book. And all three were communists. Towards Tomorrow, then, was a product of the Popular Front, a political alliance of the broad left against the existential threat of fascism and Nazism. The Communist Party of Great Britain had judged that, to see off that threat, its class war with Social Democrats and Liberals needed to pause. Once that was done, the class struggle could resume to reach the historical goal of communism. Here at the very start is Merry England bursting out of the Wembley Tunnel. It's a dress rehearsal, so the crowd is thin. The commentator tells us over the tannoy that Merry England is partly the invention of storytellers and partly the memory of a little country where 8 million men and women and children lived on a rich wheat-growing soil. That was before this. To the sound of sirens and rhythmic music, look, unsightly figures, ironclad and stiffly jointed, march into the merry scene, encircling the bewildered crowd and setting up machinery in the arena. Tannoy. These are the machines which are going to make a new world, but destroy an old one first. A factory chimney thrusts 40 feet into the air. 2 huge figures of capitalists are brought on by trucks. This one looks like Beaverbrook. The people appeal to them. What shall we do? You give our farms to sheep, destroy our villages, and give us stones to eat. Capital answers, go to the workhouse. The workhouse master will sell you to the factories. And the factory overseers, dressed like medieval torches and brandishing whips, drive people off to the factories. 4 spirals of workers fill the arena like a giant machine. Now, famous speakers challenge the tyrant system. Hunt, Payne, Godwin, Cobbett, Owen. As orator Hunt's voice rises above the music, the people prepare to destroy the machines. Says General Ludd, smash the machines, they are false gods. The crowd attacks, and the chimney bursts into flame. The capitalists respond with violence. A performer in 1938 reflected later, it was all anti-machinery. You see, the war was building up, and I think it must have been built up a fever against machines of any kind. But the Luddites were backward, weren't they? It's with Owen and New Lanark that symmetry returns. Children stand in grids, performing physical exercises and running relays. Dressed authentically in white tunics, they've left their pauper clothes in heaps. The symmetry is pronounced and the arena full. The overseers rush back to undo the good work. Then the Rochdale pioneers soberly mount the rostrum. Voices over identify them as men of all sorts, Chartists, Owenite socialists, social reformers. A parade of banners circles the arena, charting the growth of cooperation from 1844 to 1914. But capital chooses war. The arena fills with soldiers, smoke, tanks, costumed dancers with outstretched arms represent aeroplanes, ragged black vultures stooping and lurching across the arena after them. The chorus and procession of mourning women follow. We are women and proclaim, this is the accepted time. Nations, peoples, men and women, children in the glow of morning, make a ring round the aggressor, dispossess the dispossessor, build the warm alliances of humanity for peace. The commentator adds, the war is over, but for how long? He reviews the scale of the cooperative movement worldwide and then concludes that only in that unity is a hope for mankind and peace. A procession of national costumes fills the arena. A ballet of young workers flourishes red flags, faces to the sky and legs astride. The figures of capital have been toppled and the arena is triumphantly full. 2 decorated cars of peace and democracy enter. Their personifications mount the central rostrum. Its sections revolve in opposite directions and flags unfurl. A flock of white pigeons is released as the president of the South London Society gives the resolution for a peaceful and equitable solution to the present world conflicts. Episode 2 in The Pageant of Me. I didn't become an actor, but an academic, following my nose from part-time teaching. I published my stuff on the Popular Front pageants. In 1998, 2 book editors asked me to write about interwar historical pageants in general. So, in 1919, when I was making my only foray into contemporary performance, I was processing the results of a postal survey. I still think of the 1990s as recent. But making a survey using paper, when did I last do that? I got research leave for a year, visited archives and sites, and wrote a chapter. If one of the delights of my earlier research was meeting some old communists, artists, and activists, Alan and Nancy Bush, Jack Lindsay, Noreen Branson, Ewan McCall, chief delight of this phase was getting to know the work of Mary Kelly. Kelly was champion of the village pageant. Her pageants, like this one at Bradston in 1928, construct an intense sense of the local linked to a sense of the regional and national unity. As a programme note declares, the history of any English parish is the history of England in miniature. Key episodes in the Bradston pageant concern the righting of wrongs, and that is done by upper-class figures. Here in episode 1 at Bradston, the Saxon overlord Ordul, carried on his deathbed, prepares to free serfs. Kelly would write 10 years later of how her class, the minor gentry, including her great-grandfather, had abused country working people. Bradston's episodes of redress resonate with the church and squirearchical reforms of the mid-19th century, which established the modern principle of paternalist service. Towards Tomorrow looks forwards, addressing a critical present by drawing strength from a shared past. Bradston looks back to rehearse a supposedly continuous principle of service to the people, both concerned with continuity and community, whether of place or of purpose. It was fascinating to discover the sheer variety of pageants and begin to see how they developed over decades. Hundreds of examples are now, of course, extensively represented, both in print and online, by Redress of the Past, which brims with details and explores contexts. My own work, in contrast, tends to focus on the rhetorical features of pageants, how they engage audiences, create spectacle, construct authenticity, or make it wobble. Frank Lascelles' playing with the authentic at Oxford in 1907 is a case in point. Here, in episode 3, Theobald et Eton, the beginning of the university, circa AD 1110, Theobaldus has just arrived from Paris. There, he has been inspired to found a place of learning in England. He tells some gathered citizens, "If there shall be a school such as I dream of, we must find scholars." And the episode ends with him leading off to found the first school of the university. It is as if we are present, almost present, at the point of origin. We look back. The high point of the episode is when Theobald gathers a crowd around him, as here, and reports a vision he had in Paris. In this long lyrical passage, he first describes a physically recognizable Oxford, and then glimpses several commonly known actual historical episodes that are to happen after his time. "Behold, an innocent man led out alone beyond the walls, chained on a horrid pile." Theobald looks forward, and he ends with a vision of what is clearly the present day. It's not just the general present, it's the pageant field itself, containing Theobald in a small crowd. He says, "I saw a man standing where I now stand, clad in the selfsame robe that I now wear, speaking as I speak and unto you, for ye stood round me then in that far time as now." Expressions of wonder and amazement from the citizens. Around, behind you, a vast crowd was gathered, sitting as men sit in a theatre, to see a play. And here my image stood, before that multitude of gazing eyes and ears that hearkened unto me. When I ceased, the people cheered. What a claptrap. What a wonderful wobble. Come on. In 1907, Lascelles undoes his pageant from the inside. In 1951, Eldegard Peach burlesques the pageant form and its production from outside. You may know of Peach and the great Hucklow Village Players, which he founded in 1927. The town that would have a pageant was written for them. Part 2 is a topsy-turvy burlesque of the pageant itself, one marking the charter anniversary of Mangle Wurzel. Part 1 is set in the mayor's parlour of this small provincial town. Local great and good have met to discuss the charter celebrations. Sheldon, who has produced the YMCA pageant for 3 years and so considers himself an expert, has proposed an historical pageant. The mayor objects that the town has no history. Sheldon responds, "It will have once we've done the pageant." Following my nose from encountering Mary Kelly's 1936 book, How to Make a Pageant, the left-hand picture is the frontispiece of that 1936 book. I'm still in retirement as I stand here before you now, ploughing on with the various studies of interwar British drama and the life and works of Kelly. In How to Make a Pageant, Kelly writes, "The pageant will no longer merely be a social affair, but a tremendous effort of imagination and presentation. The audience will no longer sit as apathetically as is possible on a wooden seat without a back, but will form part of the play as an audience should, and will be made to experience something that is thoroughly disturbing." And having witnessed a processional pageant in Hamburg in 1936, she contrasts the arrogant, brutal, overgrown children who form the SS and the stormtroopers of Nazi Germany with the calm, quiet faces of the peasants who performed intricate dances and movements with grave precision and concentration as their fathers had done, which is more or less where we came from. Part 2 is concerned with what I'm calling the others of historical pageantry. While not historical pageants, they share at least in some part some of their key features. Historical pageants are communal performances, mostly held outdoors. They're occasional, being performed on a single occasion or a recurrent date. They're episodic, and they evoke a sense of journeying. And part of their intended function is as a cultural performance, embodying a community's sense of itself. So my focus today is on 2 of them, communal masques and tableau plays. Let's start with communal masques. The year after Louis Napoleon Parker inaugurated historical pageantry at Sherborne, he created the Warwick pageant, performed by 2,000 people, many horses, in July 1906. Coinciding with it, deliberately or not, was the Masque of Midsummer in the market town of Wymondham. The local press declared that the Norfolk folk people could spend less time and expense than by travelling to Warwick by witnessing something very like the pageant nearer home. About 100 people were involved from the town and neighbouring villages. The episodes are chronologically arranged that simply represent morning, noon, and night. The content of each is whimsical rather than historical. This is a pastoral masque, making much use of the mansion grounds lent for the occasion to combine the splendid presence of costume, dance, and, quote, rustic romp with exquisite distance. Robin Hood and his merry men enter to the sound of the hidden chorus. The hidden choir narrates the Queen of Hearts' tale in song, while the knave steals in mime. And Oberon's crew enter to the distant sound of fairy music on handbells. An exquisitely pretty scene, the press reported, to which the surroundings imparted an air of reality. The final act is a grand tableau of unity. The whole company gathers, including the now visible band and chorus. Suitably costumed figures representing England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales mount the platform to suitable airs. Performance and audience together sing the national anthem. Communal pastoral masque has already been established at Boxford on the Berkshire Downs by Charlotte M. Peake in 1903. Programmed as part of the Boxford Flower Show, one of several in the area, they continued up to the war. In 1905, Peake's husband Harold constructed the Woodland Theatre, an outdoor arena on high slopes next to the showground. The contours provided a natural amphitheatre. Many of the 50 to 60 performers were children. Peake wrote and directed. The Crowning of the Years, 1904, narrates the annual cycle, with personifications of the months and seasons briefly joining year as she changes costume from winter to spring and summer, finally being, quote, crowned with a weeping coronet to the shouting of harvest home. In the Rivers, 1905, waterways from brooks to the Thames dance, sing and recite verses recalling bygone times. Towards the end, Canal sighs, ah, but I wish that I had heard the thrilling clash of sword on sword, what time King Alfred thundered by. But the ancient times have gone, says Princess Thames, and thankfully so. Then, by incantation, Dragonfly calls up, some glimpse of Boxford in the ancient time, ere any English stream had found the path down which she hurries to the sea. And we get, quote, a prehistoric peep at Boxford in the primeval days, with a primitive family hunting the rabbit and being in their lure pursued by a fearful dragon. Let's shift the pastoral folk locus back to big houses via a very big pageant. The chief component of the Festival of Empire over 3 months at Crystal Palace in the summer of 1911 was Frank Lascelles' gigantic pageant of London and Empire. Over 1 million people watched and 15,000 performed. The openings on 12th of May and 8th of June respectively formed a crescendo towards the coronation of George V on 22nd June, which the Midlothian Journal called the real pageant of Empire. Meanwhile, many smaller celebrations were going across the country. Here, Britannia crosses a cart lake at Colne Priory in Essex in a masque of Empire. The masque was staged by a local chapter of the Victorian League, founded by women in 1901 to promote, quote, hospitality, friendship, and education amongst British territories. Towards its end, the masque celebrates the recent union of South Africa, represented by Miss Hales. Nobody apparently represented in the indigenous Africans. Representing Britannia on the cart lake is Evelyn Ullis. Let's follow her to another big house. The chief performers of a masque given at Sydenham House in Devon in 1913 were members of the county's upper crust. Well, the declared object of the show, reported in the Tatler, was to raise funds for a restoration. The communal aspect of the event was firmly owned by the local elite. The daughter of the house, Miss Tremaine, sits enthroned as Queen Elizabeth. Standing third from the left, as Mary Howard is, Mary Kelly, who designed the costumes. And seated far right is Mistress Oxenham of Oxenham, is mistress of the masque, Evelyn Ullis. We shall take a longer look at Evelyn Ullis in due course, but continuing the current theme, Mary Kelly's exquisite, I think, masque play, A Pitiful Queen, was given in the Bishop of Exeter's Palace Garden in June 1932. A parade-style pageant, including galloping cavaliers, was given a few hours before and after. The three shows altogether were the chief part of a public fete to raise funds for a church to serve a new housing estate. The play, Mary Kelly's play, recounts the passage of Queen Henrietta Maria through the city in 1644 en route to exile in France. The frieze-like setting of espaliers formalizes the passage of the Queen across the scene. She's carried on a chair because frail and pauses midway for a series of gift exchanges. In exchange for her special presence, The gardener gives her a rich posy. The mayor presents her with £200 on behalf of the city and promises eternal protection. The children dance for her. And shown here, the Queen presents Dame Grace Fursdon with a locket from the absent king, marking the death of Grace's husband George, fighting for the crown. As in several historical pageants, and indeed at the Sydenham Masque, ruling class women appear in Kelly's play as their forebears. Kneeling here, Charlotte Fursdon, Mrs. Fursdon of Fursdon, plays the part of Dame Grace, and she was a recent addition to the family. Soon after taking part, Charlotte had her portrait painted in costume, but holding the original locket, which is still in the safe. It marks her proper place in the patrilineal family. And it still hangs on the Fursdon staircase next to Sir Peter Lely's portrait of Dame Grace. So we've met 4 women makers of communal masks. Collier was a vicar's wife. Peake was a free-thinking and mystic artist, designer, poet, and novelist. Kelly was a squire's daughter and founder of the Village Drama Society. And Evelyn Oulis was second daughter of the noted portrait painter Walter William Oulis. In 1878, Walter Oulis had married into the Maitland family, cousins to the Kellys. As the private Kelly family history notes, the Kellys and Maitlands had been intertwined by what it calls a dynastic marriage in 1829 between landed wealth and mercantile wealth, typical of the times. The new public schools progressively furnished a common education for the two classes. From here, we follow Oulis and Kelly, taking a diversion through Oulis to arrive at tableau plays. Quite recently, Evelyn Oulis's great-nephew gave me access to her albums and scrapbooks. 2 of them trace her theatrical journey. In examining that journey, I shall mention the names of several amateur actors, but don't let them crowd you. The important thing is their multi-generational family businesses, their dynastic mercantile wealth. The journey begins shortly before Evelyn went to school at Wickham Abbey. It had been founded in 1896 by the women's campaigner and educational pioneer Jane Frances Dove. Dove designed Wickham as a public school for girls, education for public service. She donated a window to the parish church, dedicated in 1923 to the ministry of women to their fellows through God. It commemorates 32 women, including Florence Nightingale, Elizabeth Fry, and Emily Davis, a kind of pageant in stained glass. Music, dancing, and sports were on the curriculum at Wickham, but not drama. Names allowed. In 1896, aged 15, we find Oulis playing in private theatricals, including the part of the Old Queen in Rumpelstiltskin, at the home of Surrey hop merchant John Richardson and his sister, who both also play. Frank Wigram, playing king to Evelyn's queen, is Richardson's teenage nephew. Frank is the son of banker Robert Wigram and will by 1901 be a ship owner, as have 4 generations of Wigrams before. In 1901, he was 21. And Cecil Charrington and his sisters are members of the Charrington brewing dynasty. When Oulis returns to the fold, the focus is moved to the home of the three Wigram sisters, daughters of brewer Henry Wigram, and themselves now living in middle age on shares in the Great Western Railway. And in 1905, the focus moves back to Reigate, but now at the Charrington Children's Home, Parkside. Their mother, Joanna, is very active in making community performance in the town. In 1905, on her initiative, a garden fete, sale of work, and the pastoral play Undine were mounted in the grounds of Parkside before, quote, a good and fashionable audience. Oulis, various Charringtons, and others of the circle performed in the play. Widowed in 1894, Joanna married Harley Street physician Wilfrid Hadley in 1897. As David James Coates has demonstrated, one tactic to make private theatricals respectable in the later 19th century was to do them for charity. By the 1900s, charity was often the driving force. Full of stuff, pardon me, behind a show. Joanna's Parkside event was mounted to fund the Reigate Cot at the London Hospital in Whitechapel. It had been founded in 1740 to bring free medical treatment to the East End, and Wilfred Hadley was the medical officer there. As music theatre historians narrate, Evelyn Ulysses' mother, Lucy, was good friends with Joanna Hadley. Back in the 1870s, before marrying Walter Ulys, Lucy had witnessed and been much moved by a dramatisation of scenes from Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. And she now persuaded Evelyn to suggest to Joanna Hadley that she make a production of her own. Joanna, in turn, asked Evelyn to take the lead in writing it. The outcome was 3 charitable performances across 2 years at Reigate Priory, the Imperial Theatre in London, and Lincoln's Inn Hall. Evelyn took the part of Christiana, and 3 of Joanna's now young adult children played Hopeful, Discretion, and Faithful. The charities were for training disabled children for work, the Convalescent Home, a Diocesan Church Fund, the Inns of Court Mission, and the London Hospital. Patrons included lords, ladies, artists, and musicians. The audience was predominantly of women and children. Nugent Monk, then working with the Elizabethan Stage Society, co-directed with Joanna. And according to the press, the principal draw for the public was twofold. First was a selection of folk songs and ancient melodies arranged and conducted by Vaughan Williams. Iterations of his work at Reigate culminated in his 1951 opera of Pilgrim's Progress for the Festival of Britain, hence the interest of music theatre historians. The second was a series of tableaux designed by Frank Dixie, RA, for the London performances. I found no pictures of these, but we know that Christian's fight with Apollyon was done as a freeze-frame moving tableau, interrupted by blackouts with changes of light colour for each freeze frame. Tableau had also figured in the 1906 performance at Reigate Priory. For the celestial city, rows of angels stood on the double staircase in the grand private house enveloping the stage built below. And tableau had indeed figured in the 1870s performance that Lucy Ulys had seen. That production was by the family of author, poet, and Christian minister George MacDonald, who toured it to paying audiences for a decade from 1877. Likening it to a miracle or mystery play, the press hailed it as a possible first step in renovation of the English stage. Here on the left, author Mrs. Louisa MacDonald plays Prudence, talking to Christian's son, while Mercy and Pity look on. The MacDonalds had 10 children, plenty to fill a stage. Many of them died, however, in young years. We'll return to Pilgrim's Progress in due course, but first let's continue with tableau. Tableau vivant had been shown at some big houses since the 1830s and become a regular part of middle-class musical evenings by the 1840s. They've been deployed on commercial stages in spectacular displays since the mid-century, and from the mid-80s at least, they've been used demotically for charitable fundraising and communal pleasure. And in Christmas week 1881, villagers of Rouse-Lench near Evesham performed an oratorio, Emmanuel, comprising 12 tableaux of the early life of Christ. Here, in episode 1, top left, this is top left, nations of the world receive the vision of the cross. Episode 2 shows the vision of the celestial city. The rector had been inspired by Oberammergau. The significant context, I suspect, for the 1906 Pilgrim's Progress was the resurrection by some English churches of tableau recalling their use in medieval mystery plays. The earliest I've found is the annual series of Bethlehem tableau given from 1890 by St. Clement's in the poverty-stricken area around City Road in Islington. Here's a scene from the Reverend Henry Cresswell's The Conversion of England, written in 1895 and performed at the Church House in Westminster in 1898. It was performed by a cast of 40, combining laity and, playing the ecclesiastical roles, clergy. Costumes and scenery were designed from historical sources. In this tableau, the third of 10, the Pope blesses missionaries bound for England. Leading the group is Gregory, whose consecration as St. Augustine is shown in the 10th. We turn again to tableau and to St. Augustine, but first, Evelyn Ullis and Pilgrim's Progress via Mary Kelly. In the year Mary Kelly founded the Village Drama Society in 1919, she also founded a Kelly Dramatic Society. She wrote and directed its first play, Joseph, performed by men from the estate and neighbouring villages on Ascension Day 1919. Evelyn Ullis helped bring the show to the stage in its last week of rehearsal. The play in the next year was Ulysses Pilgrim's Progress. Here on the right, playing Christian, is tenant farmer Abel Jones, who regularly took leading parts. Both of these photos are taken on the Kelly Barn steps. The performances were done inside. But the arming of Christian is probably much the same as the live performance. It was scripted as a tableau. Ulysses' text for 1920 is much the same as for the London shows in 1907 to 8. While in the 1870s, Louisa MacDonald had dramatised the second part of Bunyan's work, Ulysses chose part 1. Nathaniel G. Lew points out that this provides a less picaresque and chaotic narrative to select from. And the use of tableau sharpens the dramaturgy, we might say argument, further. As Lew suggests, this gives a very different picture of Bunyan's path to salvation. It makes it easier and more direct, more like propaganda than an act of witness, we might say. Ascension Day plays continued until 1932. They were part of a communal event, including a special service and a feast. The aim was to raise £100 a year for the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, SPG, medical mission, which Mary's sister Ursula and her husband Frank Drew established in Ponderland, South Africa in 1920. Nearly there. Mary's family had arrived at Kelly House shortly after her father became squire in 1900. In 1901, the 13-year-old Mary inaugurated a single copy family magazine, the MEUB, named after Mary, her brother Evelyn, Ursula, and baby Reginald, all born to Maitland Kelly's second wife. These nursery children were a fairly distinct group from her 6 older half-siblings. In 1905, Mary contributed a long and detailed account of Parker's Sherborne pageant, which she had witnessed with a governess. And in 1908, she gives an account of a missionary pageant. Come along. This was one of a series of what the family history calls small, very small pageants at Kelly House grounds, inaugurated by Mary's half-sisters Margaret and Dorothea in 1905. These were an elaboration of the modest fundraising missionary events previously held by the parson and his wife in their garden every Ascension Day. They're also then precursors of the annual Kelly Dramatic Society plays. Performances of the Kelly House pageants were by children from the parishes of Kelly and neighbouring Dunterton, as members of the respective branches of the King's Messengers. Now, the King's Messengers was the children's branch of the SPG. If 1908 is typical, the pageants comprised a series of tableaux. Mary writes, the first 2 tableaux were exceedingly pretty, the colouring of the dresses being charming. In the first, the slave dealer was represented, bringing in the slaves and arranging them in groups. Then Gregory entered, and after looking round on the children, pointed at the fair Saxons and eventually brought them and led them away. The reference is to the apocryphal and racialized story developed from Bede of St. Augustine, Gregory, being motivated to launch a mission to England by the memory of such an encounter, where he was supposed to have declared that the enslaved boys were not angels, but angels. The action across the episodes is of England receiving and then transmitting the Christian message, while the Devonian of Boniface gives it a local anchoring. Part 2, the call of the nations, anchors England at the heart of the Christian mission and figures Christianization as pull rather than push. Duly costumed, the heathen nations call on England to bring them Christianity. Margaret and Dorothea will doubtless have provided the script for the pageant, but what are the children performing it in reading? King's messengers received a monthly magazine, Children of the Church. It contained both reports from missions and stories of conversion. Here in the issue for December 1904 is the purportedly true story of two brothers. The action is similar to that of the Kelly pageant. A teenage boy is converted to Christianity. He then converts his older brother, who in turn goes on to convert others. It includes Christian sacrifice. The first boy dies from the persecution both suffered from their community. And it connects directly to the target reader. The second boy becomes a king's messenger. No tableau here, but the action turns on an emblematic act, the pious destruction of a symbol of the indigenous religion. The boys use axes to destroy the Hindu demon cherished at home by their family. Let's hold an image of erasure. In 1913, Ursula Kelly married the recently ordained Frank Drew. The SPG paid for Frank's medical training, as doctors were needed more than in the missionary field, more than priests. In 1920, he set up a hospital from scratch at the existing Holy Cross mission near Flagstad in Ponderland, 100 miles south of Durban. Ursula helped with this. She also develops music and drama with the mission and its schools. I've located accounts of just two pieces of this theatre. One is a brief mention of a procession of saints on Holy Cross Day, 1932. The other is of a performance of Pilgrim's Progress by the Indigenous staff and around 50 girl and boy boarders at the mission schools on Holy Cross Day, 1927. The text was Ulysses' play, translated into Hausa to be published by the Lovedale Press in 1928. The account is by E. Jones, who I've yet to identify. Much of Jones's enthusiastic account is reminiscent of the appreciations of the Kelly Drama Society. They played naturally, for instance, becoming their characters. Meanwhile, as Mary Kelly wrote in 1931, the play had been, quote, translated into terms of Hausa life, as well as speech. Thus, according to Jones, the crowds were the everyday Pondo crowd. Then Jones pulls focus to address the setting of the performance. The piece is played on the school veranda and playing ground. To the audience left is visible a great sunny grassy slope with kraals of 3 or 4 huts. One might be Doubting Castle, and its occupant Titani, the heathen witch doctor, Giant Despair. The audience right, the kraals of P.T. Evangelist of Chief Ndalisi, still struggling in Vanity Fair, fain to leave it, yet not strong enough to tear himself from its snares. And over the heads of the audience, the players look out on the great, austere and beautiful church and the memorial cross. Jones effectively identifies the event as a cultural performance. In Singer's phrase, an elementary consistent of the culture being founded at Holy Cross. The performed journey to Christian salvation manifests a shared chief purpose of the community. The converted there were urged to convert others. Further, in Jones's pull of focus, that shared ground narrative is grounded in the here and now of that community. While not directly referenced, Titani, Chief Ndalisi, and other non-yet Christians are scenographic elements, silent characters. Frank Drew emblematically built his hospital on the site where a traditional healer had lived. But he also collaborated with. His goal was the Pondo to own and run their own hospital. It was the Drews' life work. Both the performance and mission are easily identifiable as a Eurocentric imposition on indigenous Africans. Quoting Kelly's 1931 article, Professor Mzo Sirayi of Pretoria identifies Holy Cross performances as straightforward instances of colonialism, of erasing African art. Yet in that article, Mary Kelly wrote of a concern at Holy Cross that Christianizing Africans seemed to mean the removal of much of their natural arts. And she identifies this show as part of an attempt to help the Pondo do what the Europeans had, to find a way to develop their own mature drama. She adds, this must happen before the corruptions of Western so-called civilization bar the Pondo's way. It's a Eurocentric perspective, certainly, but I doubt whether a wholly colonialist one. I think there's much to explore here, but that would take another hour or so. So I'll leave you with the final image, or three. If you haven't already, do visit the Redress of the Past website. It's a fabulous resource. The Axbys pageant was revived in 2010 and is commemorated in a tapestry. And a fresh pageant is being scheduled for this August. And the Boxwood masks were revived in 2004 and are planning to continue. Thanks.
Have a seat after your well.
Hey, I stood up.
You did stand up. You did stand up. Right. Okay. I'd like to invite any questions that you may have. This sort of fascinating and wide-ranging talk about pageants then and indeed now.
Bit of a shaggy dog.
Bit of a shaggy dog. Right. Anyone?
Or reminiscences.
Or reminiscences of ones you've been. I was just going to ask you that you opened with this 1938 one, which was obviously part of a socialist movement.
Mm.
Were there any others, or was this just an outlier one? Because most of the other ones have been religious or village celebrations.
Yeah, I look particularly at the communist ones, but the communist ones include pageant of music and the people that Alan Bush made, indoors, in a very cold Queen's Hall. There were Labour pageants still, I think, and the co-op movement had their own pageants. So within cooperation and the broad left, but really I think it was the Popular Front initiative of the communists, including Bush, that produced the stuff that I was looking at. But I relate it to May Day parades. This is an elaboration of May Day manifestation, which became, the Communist Party, well, the Labour Party, Labour, the Communist Party appropriated it from Labour movements, which were doing May Day celebrations for ages, and they formalised it as a first of the parade.
I think the point you make very well is that it's a field which has probably been understudied. I mean, there is a fantastic continuity of this from probably the early 19th century, from what you might call the liberal establishment sense of noblesse oblige. Strangely enough, I was doing a paper on Saturday in a completely different context, nothing to do with passions, about how a man, called Blocker, effectively reinvented Greenwich as a place of cultural visitation and literally rebuilt the town in a situation where he was able to bring a whole raft of what you might call establishment networking Christian liberals. I mean, this is in the time effectively of post-Napoleonic turbulence, before the Great Reform Act of 1832. I mean, all the sorts of people who nowadays, in the Labour councils, would stand up and sit and despise as being educated tots, who should all be thrown out of the revolution. But the point is, there's clearly a fantastic continuity in the 19th century, coming through into the 20th century, which is what you're looking at here, of people who have been born into or or married into money or wealth, or or it may be old money, it may be new money, but they've got a fantastic sense of cultural tradition and a sense of duty, which we would now call, or most people would now call, simply patriarchal. They'll all go against the war and shoot revolution.
And they're
Of course,
do-gooders.
is what the communists were. They were in fact hijacking. They were in fact hijacking this very traditional, God bless the squire and his relations, sense of social duty, which actually goes back, if you're really chasing it, to a pre-industrial society, which is what you see in what you might call the interest networks of the 18th century, in terms of that word interest, which is now largely forgotten, what everybody owes to each other.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it's a fascinating psychological continuity.
Yeah.
And I think that you might say industrialization of the big R and post-industrial political ideology by Marx and his followers, and it has made people completely forget this. They actually think that history, as we understand it, starts somewhere in the middle of the 19th century with industrialization. But actually, you're looking here at social traditions.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And with initial things going on into the 1960s.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
I suppose the nearest of any of us is account to anything like this was the 25 open ceremony of the Olympics. Did it all there.
And I think Roddy Doyle saw the co-op film of the 38 Pageant. It's remarkably similar in texture.
I'm really interested by the term pageants, as a term that's kind of dropped out of popular parlance. We talk a lot about carnival. We talk a lot about community play. We talk a lot about town plays. But there is a very strong tradition of community participatory plays that's coming. Obviously, Angelica trust that, particularly well that.
Yeah.
And the impact of those radical 80s, which led to more immersive performances. We get that. So I'm interested in the terminology and how pageantry came about as a term and how to define it, but also some of the forms, which again going back to more theology, the use of tableau, which is a direct parallel with what was happening with traveling magazine, and also, of course, magic lantern. That idea of telling stories through still images,
Yes.
in ordinary people,
Yes.
in ordinary spaces, and the difference between this kind of top-down attitude, where there is a sense of noblesse oblige, but there's another one which is actually all people telling stories to each other in an accessible way. The pageants allow. Buffalo Bill is the kind of commercial version of it in the 17th century as well. And so the combination of showmanship and how that connects with this sense of society, high society, presenting to their feudal underlings.
I think
now the tradition is much more radical. I think it's a very rich territory, and I'm fascinated by how the term pageant.
Yeah, but I think pageant clearly comes, as it were, from the wagon. It's the wagon in the Corpus Christi procession. And I think even though it's the church, it's the guilds sponsoring those, and the church is making use of them, but the people, as it were, will think of it very much as theirs, as pageanters, like the Semana Santa in southern Spain, where the various brotherhoods bring out the icons of Mary and Jesus and parade them through the town, in a sense, to mark their place in the community of Seville, which makes the community a civil. And the great and good are there to watch them pass by. They don't think that's for them. It's for the people walking the streets. So I think it depends how people relate to being in it. That makes sense.
What here says something. What is very interesting is how elaborate some of these pageants were, and the fact that so much money must have gone into them as a means of putting results people in the communities wouldn't have the money to actually contribute and the willingness to spend large sums.
The aim often was to make money. The railways would put on special trains. There were even special transatlantic sailings to attract vast crowds, sale of the book of the pageant. Some of them lost heavily, but often a pageant will be, it's a pageant of the history of Scotland or whatever, which was part of a week's celebrations. So there'd be the pageant with aristocrats playing parts, a grand charity ball, and so on and so forth, an exhibition, all together to raise funds for a hospital. So the aim usually was to make a profit, but sometimes they fell flat, in the interwar period at least.
Yes.
Actually taking part of the pageant.
There's a bit at the back.
I was in a pageant. What we were, it was organised by our church, and it was Pageant for Great Women. And I played Queen Bertha. My mother was Boadicea, and my sister was Florence Nightingale.
Mine was about pastoral, perhaps in Northamptonshire. It was sort of vague, it's a mystery, more or less made up. One particularly patriotic, the Queen Elizabeth did very right. It was very fun.
I was two.
There was an unbelievably famous one at Greenwich in 1930, which was the Greenwich Night Pageant. The only thing that stopped George V from coming was the fact that he was unwell, but other members of the royal family attended. It was even extended the night so that the King of Iraq could attend. It was all about, on the Greenwich Palace site in the Naval College, effectively, so from Tudor to Drake. It was scripted by Arthur Bryant, and somebody wrote a rather eminent scholar, Churchill scholar, Andrew Roberts, wrote a paper about it called Patriotism, the Last Resort of Arthur Bryant. Because it has been described as the closest thing that Britain got to fascist theatre. It was actually engineered by a man called Barry Donville, who was the president of the Royal Naval College at the time. And it's a great pageant of empire and the rise of the Greek. I mean, in Nelson, and then the British battlefield. I mean, the engineering involved and thousands of people who attended it were unbelievable. It's quite well recorded. But Donville ended up interned as a fascist sympathizer. I mean, his career crashed in the end. I mean, so it can be used. I mean, it goes right up. These things go across the scale from purely micro in a country village, right up to effectively an international event. Because they slice sideways into things like the miracle, what's his name, Max.
Max Reinhardt.
Max Reinhardt, and so on and so forth. So it's a fascinating.
Some were done to promote towns and new towns. So Dartford. So and you would have the historical pageant and gleaming steel and glass place where you show off the
Well,
manufacturing.
of course, you know, with electricity, you know, good lighting, it doesn't happen much now, but you know, in the 60s, they were doing this is somewhere in the air. And this is much the same sort of thing,
Yeah.
but you know, it tends to be after dark.
There's lots of outdoor theatre that's taking place with music. So right at the moment, people are walking around, parading around cities all around Britain. I mean, it's a 21st century phenomenon, the common technology. And it cuts right across all sides of politics. But it's very much a format that's being embraced by town culture, city culture, but also arts communities are using it. But there's very little awareness of the historical context from which it comes.
Well, one of the nice things about the Boxer people is that they began, somebody turned up this stuff about the pigs. And what they did was they first of all restaged the originals and then made a show about the pigs. And then they made stuff about the Roman pavement that's been discovered. But it is a real community play now.
Well, Mick, I'd really like to thank you for our stroll through pageants then and now. I don't know if any of your communities are going to be doing any pageants for the Platinum Jubilee, or maybe you might be having your own personal pageant in your street or home. But thank you so much for this. And I think we can now adjourn to a well-deserved drink and some sandwiches, is it? And desserts. Cake. I am so sorry. Okay, but please.
Thanks for having me.
No.